The shuttle docked at Station Helix 9 with a loud hiss of pressure release, grabbed her small bag and walked down the ramp with the other new cadets. Her heart was beating fast. She had dreamed of this moment for years. The Galactic Military Academy was the most famous training center in all of known space. Soldiers from over 40 different species came here to learn. Only the best graduated. Only the strongest survived. Was not sure she was either of those things. She was 22 years old, born on a small outer colony called Nu. Her family had been farmers for 3 generations. They grew rice in artificial fields under dome lights. They were simple people with simple lives. No one in her family had ever joined the military. No one had ever left the colony until now. But had always felt something burning inside her, a need to be more, a need to prove that she was worth something. So she had studied hard, trained hard, and somehow passed the entrance tests. Her scores were not amazing. They were just good enough. She knew she would have to work twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up. The orientation hall was massive. Hundreds of cadets stood in neat rows, wearing crisp new uniforms that the academy had given them. The humans stood together in one section. The species stood in another. The tall reptilian cadets towered over everyone else. There were beings with 4 arms, beings with no eyes, beings that floated instead of walked. Had never seen so many aliens in her life. She found her place among the human cadets and stood at attention. That was when the whispers started. What is she wearing? Is that real leather? Where did she even find something like that? Kept her eyes forward, but she felt her face grow hot. She knew what they were talking about. It was the jacket. The jacket was old, very old. It was made of brown leather that had cracked and faded over many, many years. There were patches sewn onto the sleeves, small pieces of colored cloth with symbols and numbers that meant nothing to most people anymore. The collar was worn soft from use. The zipper was metal, not the smooth magnetic seals that modern clothes used. Above the left pocket, a name was stitched in thread that had turned yellow with age. CPL Park. The jacket did not match her uniform. It did not match anything in this century. It looked like something from a museum, something that belonged behind glass with a small sign explaining what life was like hundreds of years ago. But wore it anyway. She had worn it every day since she was 16 years old. She would not stop now. A tall human cadet walked over to her. He had perfect hair, perfect teeth, and a perfect uniform. His name tag said DAEHO. He looked at like she was a strange insect he had found in his food. "Hey, relic girl," he said loudly so everyone around them could hear. "Did you rob a grave before coming here? What is that thing?" Some of the other cadets laughed, did not respond. She kept her eyes forward. Walked in a circle around her, examining the jacket like it was evidence of a crime. "This is real animal skin, isn't it? That's disgusting. Do you know how primitive that is? We stopped killing animals for clothing 300 years ago." "Maybe she couldn't afford a real jacket," another cadet said. "You know how poor those outer colonies are." More laughter. A tall cadet named clicked his mandibles and leaned closer. His compound eyes reflected its image 1,000 times. "I have studied humans," he said in his buzzing voice. "But I have never seen one wear dead flesh as decoration. Is this some kind of religious practice, a primitive ritual?" "It's not primitive," said quietly. "It's just old." "Old and ugly," said. "You should throw it away before the instructors see it. They'll think you're crazy." Finally turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was something hard underneath. "I'm not throwing it away." Raised his eyebrows. "Oh, really? And why is that?" Did not answer. She turned her eyes forward again and said nothing more. The laughter and whispers continued throughout the orientation ceremony. The academy director gave a long speech about honor and duty and sacrifice. Barely heard it. She was too busy feeling the weight of all those staring eyes on her back. When the ceremony ended, the cadets were assigned to their dormitory rooms. walked alone through the long metal hallways, carrying her small bag and wearing her old jacket. Other cadets pointed at her as she passed. Some laughed openly. Others just shook their heads in confusion. Her room was small but clean. A bed, a desk, a locker, and a window that looked out at the stars. Sat on the bed and finally let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking a little. She had known this would be hard. She had known people would not understand, but knowing something and feeling it were two different things. She took off the jacket and held it in her hands. The leather was soft and warm from her body heat. She ran her fingers over the patches on the sleeves. There were 12 of them. Each one was different. Each one had a story. She looked at the name stitched above the pocket. CPL, Park, Corporal Park, Park. Her great-great-grandmother. Had never met her, of course. Had died long before was born, long before humanity had even left Earth, but had grown up hearing stories about her. Stories her grandmother had told her on cold nights in their small farming dome. Stories about a young woman who had flown helicopters in a war that most people had forgotten. Stories about courage and sacrifice and the price of survival. The jacket was the only thing left of her, the only proof that she had existed at all. Pressed the jacket against her chest and closed her eyes. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, soft and old and full of love. This jacket has seen things you cannot imagine, little. It has been through fire and blood and darkness, but it survived, just like our family survived, just like you will survive. Opened her eyes and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of kilometers away, was Earth, the original home, the place where everything had started. She hung the jacket carefully in her locker and began to unpack her few belongings. Tomorrow, training would begin. Tomorrow, she would have to prove herself. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel small and scared and alone. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would be strong. 6 weeks passed at the academy. 6 long, hard weeks of training, studying, and enduring. Woke up every morning at 5. She ran 10 kilometers before breakfast. She attended classes on starship tactics, alien biology, weapon systems, and survival techniques. She spent her evenings in the combat simulators, fighting holographic enemies until her muscles screamed and her eyes burned. Then she studied until midnight, memorizing things that other cadets seemed to learn effortlessly. She was not the fastest cadet. She was not the strongest. Her test scores were average at best. But she never quit. She never complained. She just kept going day after day, pushing herself harder than anyone else. And every single day, during her free hours, she wore the jacket. The other cadets had not stopped laughing. They had just gotten quieter about it. Now they whispered behind her back instead of saying things to her face. They called her Old Earth and Relic Girl when they thought she could not hear. They made jokes about her at meals, imitating the way she touched the jacket sometimes, running her fingers over the patches like they meant something. Ignored all of it. She had learned long ago that words could only hurt you if you let them. So she built a wall inside herself, a place where the laughter could not reach. She focused on her training and nothing else. But someone was watching her, someone who did not laugh. Commander had been an instructor at the academy for 31 years. He was 63 years old, though he looked older. His face was covered in scars, some from battles and some from accidents that he never talked about. His left arm was made of metal and plastic from the elbow down, a replacement for the one he had lost during the siege of Praxis Moon. His hair was gray and cut very short. His eyes were dark and tired, like they had seen too much and could never unsee it. He was the most respected instructor at the academy. He was also the most feared. Cadets said that Commander had killed more enemies than any other soldier in the fleet. They said he had once held a defensive position for 3 days without sleep, food, or ammunition. They said he had walked through fire, crawled through poison gas, and fought hand-to-hand against aliens twice his size. Some of these stories were true. Some were exaggerated. But all of them agreed on one thing. Commander was not someone you wanted to disappoint. He noticed jacket on the very first day. He recognized it immediately. He knew exactly what it was and where it came from, but he said nothing. He just watched. He watched her train harder than anyone else. He watched her stay late in the simulators when other cadets went asleep. He watched her study old military texts from centuries ago, books that most people had forgotten existed. He watched her touch the jacket, that small private gesture that she probably thought no one noticed. And he watched how she never defended herself, never explained, never asked for sympathy or understanding. After 6 weeks, he decided it was time to learn more. One evening was alone in the historical archives. It was a small room filled with old books and data tablets, records from the early days of human civilization. Most cadets never came here. They thought history was boring and useless. Why study the past when the future was so much more exciting? But came here often. Tonight she was reading about something called the Korean War, a conflict that had happened on Earth over 600 years ago. It was a small war by modern standards, fought on a tiny peninsula on a single planet. But thousands of people had died. Thousands more had been wounded, and the effects had lasted for generations. That jacket. Jumped in her seat. She had not heard anyone enter. She turned and saw Commander standing in the doorway, his metal arm gleaming under the dim lights. "Sir," she said, standing quickly at attention. Walked slowly into the room. His footsteps were soft, almost silent. He moved like a predator, calm and controlled. He stopped a few meters away from her and looked at the jacket she was wearing. "Where did you get it?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. Hesitated. No one had ever asked her that question before. They just laughed or made comments. They never actually wanted to know. "It was my great-great-grandmother's, sir," she said. "She was a pilot, on old Earth before the expansion." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been surprise or recognition or memory. "What is her name?" he asked. "The one on the jacket." "Park, sir. Corporal Park. She flew rescue helicopters during the Pacific conflicts. She saved 47 lives before she was 25 years old." Silence filled the room, stared at the jacket for a long moment. His eyes moved over the patches, the worn leather, the faded stitching. He seemed to be reading something that only he could see. "The Pacific conflicts," he said quietly. "That was a brutal time. No shields, no regeneration tanks, no orbital support. Just humans fighting humans with primitive weapons and primitive machines." "Yes, sir," said. "My grandmother told me stories. She said great-great-grandmother never talked about the war herself. She just lived quietly, like surviving was enough." Nodded slowly. "The ones who saw the worst of it rarely speak. They carry it instead, in their silence, in their scars." He paused. "In their jackets." He looked at directly for the first time. His dark eyes were intense, searching, weighing her like she was a weapon he was considering for battle. "Why do you wear it?" he asked. "You know the other cadets laugh at you. You know it makes your life harder. Why not just put it away?" Thought about the question. She had asked herself the same thing many times, but the answer was always the same. "Because I don't want to forget, sir," she said. "I don't want to forget what it cost. The people who came before us, they didn't have any of the things we have now. They didn't have technology or medicine or safety. They just had themselves. They had to be strong because there was no other choice. And they were. They survived. They built everything we have today." She touched the jacket gently. "This jacket reminds me of that. It reminds me that I come from people who didn't give up. No matter how hard things got, they kept going. I want to be like them." Commander was silent for a long time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the archives. Stood alone in the quiet room, her heart pounding. She did not know what had just happened. She did not know if she had said the right things or the wrong things. She only knew that something had changed. She looked down at the jacket. The old leather seemed to glow softly under the archive lights. The patches looked brighter somehow, more alive. "I hope I made you proud, great-great-grandmother," she whispered. The jacket, of course, did not answer, but felt warmer anyway. The next morning, an announcement echoed through every speaker on Station Helix 9. All cadets were ordered to report to the main assembly hall immediately. No exceptions. No delays. Was in the middle of her morning run when she heard it. She stopped, breathing hard, and looked up at the ceiling where the speakers were hidden. Emergency assemblies were rare. They usually meant someone was in serious trouble or something very important was about to happen. She made her way to the assembly hall along with hundreds of other cadets. The massive room was filling up quickly. Humans, reptilians, and dozens of other species took their assigned positions in neat rows. The air was thick with confusion and whispered questions. No one knew why they had been called. Found her spot near the back of the human section. She was wearing her uniform, but over it, as always, was the jacket. She felt the familiar weight of it on her shoulders, the soft leather against her arms. Some cadets nearby glanced at her and smirked, but she ignored them. Then Commander walked onto the stage. The entire hall went silent. Stood at the center, his metal arm hanging at his side, his face hard as stone. He looked out at the assembled cadets with eyes that seemed to see everything and everyone at once. "Cadet," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried through the hall like thunder. "Step forward." Every head turned to look at her, felt her stomach drop. What had she done wrong? Was she being expelled? Had someone complained about the jacket again? She walked forward on legs that felt like water. The distance to the stage seemed endless. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, watching, judging, waiting to see what would happen. When she finally reached the front, she stood at attention and tried to keep her face calm. Looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to face the assembled cadets. "For 6 weeks," he said slowly, "I have watched many of you laugh at this woman. I have watched you mock her clothes. I have heard you call her names behind her back. You have made jokes about her jacket, about her colony, about her scores." The hall was utterly silent now. No one moved, no one breathed. "Do any of you know what that jacket actually is?" No one answered. Activated the holographic display behind him. The air flickered, and suddenly images appeared, floating in the space above the stage. Old photographs, grainy video footage, documents written in languages that most cadets had never seen, pictures of a small blue planet with green and brown land masses. "Before humanity reached the stars," said, "we fought our wars on a single world. We call it Old Earth now, but back then it was just Earth. The only home we had, the only home we knew." He pointed at the images. They showed soldiers in primitive clothing, carrying weapons that looked like toys compared to modern equipment. They showed vehicles that rolled on wheels instead of hovering. They showed aircraft that needed fuel and runways and could not leave the atmosphere. "Our ancestors did not have shields," continued. "They did not have regeneration tanks or neural backups or emergency teleportation. When they were wounded, they bled until someone stopped the bleeding or they died. When their aircraft crashed, they burned. When their ships sank, they drowned. There were no second chances, no respawns. Death was final." He looked then at her jacket. "What this woman wears is called a flight jacket. It was standard equipment for military pilots on old Earth. The leather protected them from cold at high altitudes. The patches on the sleeves are mission markers. Each one represents a combat operation that the wearer survived." He pointed at the patches on sleeves. 12 patches, 12 missions, 12 times that the original owner of this jacket flew into danger and came back alive. The images on the holographic display changed. Now they showed a young woman, barely older than, standing next to a strange aircraft with spinning blades on top. She was small and thin, but her eyes were fierce. She wore the same jacket. "This is Corporal Park," said. She lived over 600 years ago. She flew rescue helicopters during a conflict called the Pacific Wars. Do you know what that means? She flew a machine made of metal and glass into active combat zones. She had no shields, no weapons, nothing but her skill and her courage. He paused to let that sink in. Her job was to rescue wounded soldiers. She would fly into places where bombs were falling and bullets were flying. She would land her helicopter, load the injured onto her aircraft and fly them back to safety. If she made a mistake, if she flew too slow or too low, she would be shot down. If her helicopter was damaged, there was no ejection system. She would fall out of the sky and die. The hall was completely silent. Even the aliens, who did not always understand human history, were listening carefully. Corporal Park was shot down 3 times, said. His voice dropped lower, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear. 3 times her helicopter was hit by enemy fire. 3 times she crashed. And 3 times she pulled herself out of the wreckage, treated her own wounds, and kept fighting until rescue came. She earned every patch on that jacket with her own blood. He turned to look at who was standing near the front of the human section. His face had gone pale. You called this jacket primitive, said. You called it disgusting. You said it belonged in a museum. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. That jacket has seen more real combat than every cadet in this room combined. It was worn by a woman who saved 47 lives with nothing but a fragile machine and her own unbreakable will. She flew into hell again and again, not because she had to, but because she refused to leave people behind. His voice was very quiet now, barely above a whisper, but every word hit like a hammer. Corporal Park died at the age of 28. Her final mission was a rescue operation during a storm. She knew it was too dangerous. She knew she might not come back, but there were wounded soldiers trapped in the mountains, and no one else would go. So she flew into the storm anyway. She saved 9 people that night before her helicopter finally gave out. He looked at. There was something in his eyes that might have been respect. Her body was never recovered, but her jacket was. It was found in the wreckage, burned and torn but still intact. Her family kept it for 600 years. 600 years passed down from generation to generation until it reached this young woman standing before you now. Turned back to face the cadets, his voice grew stronger. You laughed at her because she wears old clothes, but those old clothes represent everything that we as soldiers are supposed to be: courage, sacrifice, loyalty, the refusal to abandon those who need us, even when it costs us everything. He stepped back from the edge of the stage. I want every single one of you to remember this moment. Remember what real courage looks like. Remember what it means to wear something that has been through fire and blood and still survives. He paused. And the next time you think about laughing at someone for being different, remember Corporal Park. Remember what she did, and ask yourself if you would have the courage to do the same. The assembly ended in silence. No one spoke, no one moved. They just stood there processing what they had heard. Walked back to her place in the formation. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. She touched the jacket gently, feeling the old leather under her fingers. Thank you, great-great-grandmother, she whispered. Thank you for everything. Around her, the cadets who had laughed at her for 6 weeks looked away in shame. Everything was different now. Everything had changed. In the days after Commander's speech, everything changed for. No one laughed at her anymore. No one whispered behind her back or made jokes about the jacket. Instead, they looked at her differently. Some looked with curiosity, some with respect, some with something that might have been shame for how they had treated her before. Cadets who had ignored her for 6 weeks suddenly wanted to talk to her. They approached her in the cafeteria, in the training halls, in the dormitory corridors. They asked questions about old Earth, about her family, about the jacket and its history. What were the wars like back then? A young cadet named Minyu asked her one evening. He was from one of the inner colonies, born into wealth and comfort, raised in a world where violence was something that happened far away. I mean, without any of our technology, how did they even fight? Thought about the question. She had studied this history her whole life, but explaining it to someone who had never imagined such a world was difficult. They used weapons that fired small pieces of metal, she said. Bullets, they were called. No energy shields could stop them. No regeneration tanks could heal the wounds they made. If a bullet hit you in the right place, you died. It was that simple. Minyu shook his head in disbelief. That sounds terrifying. It was, said, but they fought anyway. They had to. There was no other choice. Even the tall who had called her primitive came to apologize. He stood before her in the training hall, his compound eyes reflecting her image 1,000 times, and dipped his head in the gesture his species used to show respect. I spoke without understanding, he said in his buzzing voice. Among my people, we also have objects of great significance, items passed down through generations. I should have recognized that your jacket was such an object. I was foolish and I am sorry. Nodded and accepted his apology. She understood that ignorance was not the same as cruelty, had simply not known. Now he did. The one person who did not apologize was, he avoided in the hallways and refused to look at her during training. His face was always tight with some emotion that could not quite read. Was it embarrassment, anger, resentment? She did not know and she did not ask. Some wounds took time to heal. Some people needed space to understand their own mistakes. Commander began paying special attention to her training. He invited her to advanced tactical sessions that were usually reserved for top-ranked cadets. He taught her things that were not in any textbook, strategies and techniques from wars that most people had forgotten. One evening, after a particularly brutal simulation exercise, asked her to stay behind. The other cadets filed out, exhausted and sweating, and soon was alone with the old commander in the empty training room. You did well today, said. It was rare for him to give compliments. Your tactical thinking is improving. Thank you, sir, said. Walked to the window and looked out at the stars. His metal arm caught the light, gleaming silver and cold. Do you know why I told everyone about your jacket? He asked. Thought about it, to teach them a lesson, sir. Partly, said, but there was another reason. He turned to look at her. I wanted them to understand what humanity really is, what makes us special. He began to pace slowly, his footsteps soft on the metal floor. We have been in space for 300 years now. We have met dozens of alien species. Some are stronger than us. Some are smarter. Some live for thousands of years. Some can survive in environments that would kill a human in seconds. By most measures, we should be nothing special. He stopped packing and faced her directly. But we are special. We have expanded faster than any other species in known history. We have won wars against enemies that should have destroyed us. We have built an empire that spans hundreds of star systems. And do you know why? Shook her head. Because we refuse to stop, said. Other species are logical. They calculate odds, measure risks, retreat when the numbers are against them. But humans are not logical. We fight when we should run. We keep going when we should give up. We survive things that should kill us and then we come back stronger. He pointed at her jacket. That jacket represents everything that makes humanity dangerous. Your great-great-grandmother flew into combat zones in a machine made of metal and glass. She was shot down 3 times and kept fighting. She died trying to save people she had never met, in a storm that any reasonable person would have avoided. His voice grew quieter. That is not logical. That is not rational. But that is what humanity is. We are the species that walks into fire because someone needs our help. We are the species that refuses to accept defeat, even when defeat is the only sensible option. Listened carefully. She had never heard anyone explain it this way before. The other cadets needed to understand that, continued. They have grown up with technology and comfort. They think that courage means having the best weapons and the strongest shields, but real courage is much simpler and much harder than that. Real courage is doing what needs to be done, even when you are afraid, even when you know you might not survive. He looked at with something that might have been kindness. You understand that. I saw it in you from the first day. You did not defend yourself when they mocked you. You did not explain or complain or ask for help. You just kept going day after day, carrying the weight of your legacy in silence. Felt tears building in her eyes, but she held them back. The jacket is not just a piece of clothing, said. It is a responsibility. It is a promise. Every time you put it on, you are saying that you will live up to what it represents, that you will be brave, that you will never give up, that you will never leave people behind. He paused. Can you keep that promise? Thought about her great-great-grandmother, a young woman flying through storms and fire to save strangers. She thought about all the people in her family who had kept the jacket safe for 600 years, passing it down like a sacred treasure. She thought about everything she had endured at the academy, the laughter and the loneliness and the long nights of doubt. And she thought about what she wanted to become. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice was steady. I can keep that promise. Nodded slowly. For a moment his face softened. Good, he said. Then keep training, keep learning. And when the time comes to prove yourself, do not hesitate. Be the person that jacket needs you to be. He turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he stopped and looked back at her. Your great-great-grandmother would be proud of you. Never forget that. Then he was gone. Stood alone in the empty training room. She looked down at the jacket, at the worn leather and faded patches, at the name stitched above the pocket. CPL Park. I will make you proud, she whispered. I promise. The stars outside the window seemed to shine a little brighter. 3 months after Commander's speech, everything had learned was put to the test. It started as a routine training exercise. 20 cadets were sent on a shuttle to a small moon called 7 for a survival simulation. They were supposed to land, complete some basic navigation exercises, and return to the station before nightfall. It should have been simple. It should have been safe. But space does not care about plans. Halfway to the surface, the shuttle's main engine failed. Warning lights flashed across every screen. Alarms screamed through the cabin. The pilot, a senior cadet named, fought desperately to control the falling craft, but there was nothing she could do. They hit the moon's surface at an angle, bouncing and rolling across rocky terrain before finally coming to a stop in a cloud of dust and debris. When the dust settled, the shuttle was a wreck. The hull was cracked. The engine was destroyed. The communication systems were smashed beyond repair. Half the cadets were injured, some seriously. And they were completely alone on a barren moon with thin atmosphere and no way to call for help. Back on Station Helix 9, it took 3 hours for anyone to realize something was wrong. When the shuttle failed to return, Commander immediately launched a rescue operation. But 7 was far away. Even the fastest ships would need 6 hours to reach it, and no one knew if the cadets could survive that long. They called for volunteers to join an advance rescue team that would launch immediately in a smaller, faster ship. The mission was dangerous. The smaller ship could not carry much equipment. The team would have to land on an unknown crash site, find survivors in hostile terrain, and keep them alive until the main rescue arrived. Was the first to step forward. She did not hesitate. She did not think about the risks. She just stepped forward, her jacket worn over her uniform like armor. The advance team was small, just 5 volunteers including. They loaded into the fast shuttle and launched within the hour. Spent the journey checking medical supplies, reviewing the terrain maps, and preparing for the worst. When they finally reached 7, what they found was chaos. The crashed shuttle was broken into 3 pieces. Debris was scattered across a kilometer of rocky ground. Dust storms swept across the surface, limiting visibility to almost nothing. The temperature was dropping fast as the moon rotated away from its sun. In a few hours, it would be cold enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes. The rescue team landed as close as they could and went to work immediately, took charge of the medical efforts. She moved through the wreckage, finding survivors, treating wounds, keeping people calm. Her training took over. She did not feel afraid. She did not have time to feel afraid. The injuries were bad. Several cadets had broken bones. One had a deep cut on her stomach that was bleeding heavily. Two were unconscious and unresponsive. And everywhere went, she found people who were scared and cold and convinced they were going to die. She found trapped under a piece of the shuttle hull. His legs were crushed beneath the metal. His face was pale with pain and blood loss. When he saw kneeling beside him, his eyes went wide. He gasped, "What are you doing here?" "Rescuing you," she said simply. She examined the wreckage, calculating how to free him without causing more damage. "Stay still. This is going to hurt." She called two other rescuers over and together they lifted the metal piece just enough for it to pull free. He screamed in pain, but she did not stop. She dragged him to safety, applied emergency stabilizers to his legs, and gave him medication for the pain. When she was done, looked at her with eyes full of confusion and something that might have been guilt. "Why?" he asked. His voice was weak. "After everything I said to you, after how I treated you, why did you come to save me?" Looked down at her jacket. The leather was now covered in dust and blood. Some of it was hers. Most of it was from the people she had been treating. But the name on the pocket was still visible, still clear. CPL Park. "Because that is what this jacket means," she said quietly. "You do not leave people behind, ever. It does not matter who they are or what they have done. When someone needs help, you help them. That is the only thing that matters." Stared at her for a long moment. Then tears began to roll down his dusty cheeks. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry for everything." Nodded. "I know. Now rest. We are going to get you home." The next few hours were the hardest of life. She worked without stopping, moving from one injured cadet to another, treating wounds, fighting the cold, keeping everyone alive. The dust storms grew worse. The temperature dropped further. Two of the other rescuers collapsed from exhaustion and had to treat them too. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Every time she felt tired, every time she wanted to rest, she thought about her great-great-grandmother. She thought about a young woman flying through fire and storms to save people she had never met. She thought about what it meant to wear this jacket and carry this legacy. And she kept going. When the main rescue ships finally arrived, was still working. She had saved 19 of the 20 cadets. One had died in the initial crash, injuries too severe for anyone to treat, but 19 others were alive because of her. The rescue teams found her kneeling beside an unconscious cadet, still checking vital signs, still refusing to give up. Her hands were shaking with exhaustion. Her face was pale. Her jacket was torn and burned in several places. But she was still fighting. Commander was on the first rescue ship. When he saw, something changed in his old face. Something softened, something that might have been pride. "Cadet," he said, his rough voice gentle for once. "Your work here is done. Let us take over." Looked up at him. Her eyes were red from dust and exhaustion, but she managed a small smile. 19 survivors, sir," she said. "I could not save them all, but I saved everyone I could." Knelt down beside her. He put his metal hand on her shoulder. "You did more than save them," he said. "You showed them what a real soldier looks like. You showed them what humanity means." He looked at the jacket, torn and bloody but still intact. "Your great-great-grandmother is watching you right now," he said quietly, "and I promise you she is proud." Finally let herself cry then, just a little, just enough. Years later, when people told the story of the 7 rescue, they always mentioned the young cadet who had led the advance team. They talked about her courage, her skill, her refusal to stop even when everything seemed impossible. And they always mentioned the jacket. The old, worn leather jacket that she never took off. The jacket that had been passed down through 600 years of history. The jacket that carried the name of a hero who had died saving strangers in a storm. They called her Old Earth now, but it was not an insult anymore. It was a title. It was a legend. And it had been earned in fire. At Commander's retirement ceremony, someone asked him to name the finest soldier he had ever trained. He did not hesitate. Cadet, he said, the girl with the old jacket. She understood something that most soldiers never learn. Courage is not about weapons or technology or strength. It is about the choice to keep going when everything tells you to stop. It is about refusing to leave people behind, no matter the cost. He paused, his old eyes distant with memory. Her great-great-grandmother saved 47 people in her lifetime, saved 19 in a single day, and she is just getting started. He smiled then, a rare thing for his face. Humanity is in good hands. Far away on a frontier outpost at the edge of known space stood watching the stars. She was older now, a commander herself, leading her own unit. The jacket was still on her shoulders, more worn than ever, covered in new patches that she had earned herself. She touched the name stitched above the pocket, CPL, Park, and below it now in newer thread her own name, CDR, YUNA. Two names, two soldiers, 600 years apart. But the same heart, the same courage, the same refusal to give up. Smiled and turned back to her duties. The stars were waiting. And there were always more people to save.